Welcome back all. Over the last couple of years we have heard that President Trump is a Russian spy, abused the power of his office and so many accusations, that it is frankly getting tiresome. But in recent weeks and months we have seen the Democrats losing it totally with their one-sided impeachment hearings where the accusers are the only ones to call witnesses. And even this backfired in the faces of their representatives with the witnesses giving their versions and assumptions of what happened. During these past few months we have heard many reporters present that explosive testimony was heard in the closed-door depositions. But how did these reporters get the information even before the public hearings? But then again Shifty Schiff, being chairperson of these hearings and depositions, released what he wanted to. And the leftist media ate up all this selective information to undermine the duly elected president.
Two more impeachment witnesses going before the cameras today after hearing testimony from President Trump's dealmaker on Ukraine.
EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland confirmed what the president previously denied, the existence of a quid pro quo. The front page of this morning's New York Times, you see there, quote Sondland saying, "We followed the president's orders."
Sondland also told lawmakers that other top officials knew what was going on, but the president and his allies are pushing back.
It comes as we learn new details about when Ukraine knew that its military aid had been frozen. ABC's Megan Tavrizian has more from Capitol Hill. Megan, good morning.
Good morning, Janae and Kenneth. Even though Ambassador Sondland donated $1 million to President Trump's campaign, the president is now distancing himself from the ambassador.
The most anticipated witness in the impeachment inquiry, living up to expectations, delivering the most explosive details yet.
Who would benefit from an investigation of the Bidens?
I assume President Trump would benefit.
There we have it.
U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland confirming there was a quid pro quo regarding Ukraine and implicating several top officials, including Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret.
He named names.
Many people.
And, well, Secretary Pompeo?
Yes.
And Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
Yes.
Republicans hammering Sondland on whether the president explicitly told the ambassador aid was contingent on the investigations.
Nobody else on this planet told you that Donald Trump was tying aid to these investigations. Is that correct?
I think I already testified.
No, answer the question.
Yes.
And new this morning, details on the timeline on when Ukraine knew aid was being withheld. Top Pentagon official Laura Cooper testifying the Ukrainians were aware that the U.S. was withholding military aid as early as July 25th, the same day of that phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. This contradicts the Republican argument that Ukraine didn't know about the delay in aid, so there couldn't be a quid pro quo. President Trump declaring victory, seizing on a small part of Sondland's testimony.
And now, here's my response that he gave. I want nothing. That's what I want from Ukraine. That's what I said. I want nothing. I said it twice.
And the timing of when President Trump told this to Ambassador Sondland matters here because it was after the White House officially found out about the whistleblower complaint. Kenneth, Janae.
And Megan, looking back at that hearing, really, I feel like there was two statements that really stuck out there. And we mentioned one of, we followed the president's order, and the other one we've reported is Sondland saying that everyone was in the loop. So break that down for us about what he meant by everyone was in the loop.
Yeah, of course, Kenneth. Ambassador Sondland really named names yesterday, particularly mentioning Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and also Vice President Mike Pence. He said that the State Department is not letting him get into those emails at the State Department, but he did bring an email that showed an exchange between him and Secretary Pompeo talking about breaking up the logjam regarding security. And then he said that he personally talked to the Vice President about his concern of delaying aid to Ukraine. We have a clip. Let's listen to the testimony from yesterday about that exchange.
But I think I spoke up at some point late in the meeting and said it looks like everything is being held up until these statements get made, and that's my personal belief.
And Vice President Pence just nodded his head?
Again, I don't recall any exchange or where he asked me any questions. I think it was sort of a duly noted.
Well, he didn't say, Gordon, what are you talking about?
No, he did not.
He didn't say, What investigations?
He did not.
And Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have both denied these claims. Kenneth Janae.
All right, Megan, thank you. And a new poll from the swing state of Wisconsin shows 40% of registered voters believe the president should be impeached and removed from office. That's down 4% from last month. The drop in support was seen in both parties. The poll was conducted between November 13th and 17th before this week's testimony.
New subpoenas have been issued stemming from the investigation into two of Rudy Giuliani's associates who were charged with campaign finance violations. Sources tell ABC News the subpoenas from federal prosecutors in New York were sent to a lobbying firm and to a super PAC that's backing President Trump's re-election campaign. Those same prosecutors have been investigating Giuliani for allegedly violating lobbying and campaign finance laws. His two associates have also been linked to the pressure campaign against Ukraine.
Now to the big debate in Atlanta. The Democrats running for president facing off in another fiery debate clashing over health care, foreign policy, and taxes. But ABC's Trevor Ault reports all 10 candidates did agree on one thing.
After the historic day of impeachment proceedings in Washington, 10 of the top Democratic presidential candidates sparred over who deserves to challenge President Trump.
We cannot simply be consumed by Donald Trump, because if we are, you know what, we're going to lose the election.
The candidates largely agreed on impeaching the president.
We have to establish the principle, no one is above the law.
It is a criminal enterprise engaged in by the president, from what we heard today, the vice president, the secretary of state, and the chief of staff.
Donald Trump doesn't want me to be the nominee. That's pretty clear.
Former Vice President Biden was asked if he would support a criminal investigation of Trump after he leaves office.
Look, I would not direct my Justice Department like this president does. I'd let them make their independent judgment.
There was plenty of disagreement on other issues, including the legalization of marijuana.
This week, I hear him literally say that I don't think we should legalize marijuana. I thought you might have been high when you said it. and let me tell you.
And the candidates once again clashed on health care.
The reason I insist on Medicare for all who want it as the strategy to deliver on that goal we share of universal health care is that is something that, as a governing strategy, we can unify the American people around.
The fact is that right now, the vast majority of Democrats do not support Medicare for all. It couldn't pass the United States Senate right now.
But Biden is getting the most attention for his gaffe when talking about his support from Senator Carol Moseley Braun, saying the only black woman ever elected to the U.S. Senate endorses him. He said that with Senator Kamala Harris standing just feet away from him.
The only African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate. A whole range of people.
No,
my point is
that's not true. The other one is here.
Biden clarified that he meant to say Braun was the first black woman to be elected to the Senate.
Look, the former vice president's team is going to say that he often has slips of the tongue and enjoys really strong support in the African American.
As the House prepares for a full floor vote tomorrow, there is new fallout this morning from the explosive testimony of the White House aide and Iraq war veteran on President Trump's Ukraine phone call. He testified that key words and phrases were omitted from the official transcript of that call. And our senior congressional correspondent Mary Bruce is on Capitol Hill with the details. Good morning, Mary.
George, good morning. Well, there were always gaps in the White House version of the transcript of this call, but the White House said that was just a voice trailing off or a pause in the conversation. But now a key witness who was listening in on that call and was tasked with editing this transcript reportedly says that details were left out. This morning, new questions about the handling of the call at the center of this impeachment inquiry. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, the first witness with first-hand knowledge of that call to testify, reportedly told investigators the crucial phrases were left out of the White House transcript of the call. According to the New York Times, Vindman, a top Ukraine expert on the National Security Council, testified that on the call, the president claimed there were recordings of former Vice President Joe Biden discussing corruption. You can see the ellipses here in the version of the transcript that was released by the White House. The Times reports that Vindman also recalled that Ukrainian President Zelensky made an explicit mention on the call of the energy company where Biden's son, Hunter, served on the board. Vindman tried to add those details to the reconstructed White House transcript of the call, but according to the Times, his edits were not included, and it's not clear why.
I want to thank Colonel Vindman for
his courage in coming forward.
In 10.5 hours of testimony, Vindman told lawmakers he was disturbed by what he heard on that call and the pressure that President Trump was putting on the Ukrainian leader to investigate the Bidens. Vindman told them, "I did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen," adding that it would undermine U.S. national security. Behind closed doors, the deposition grew heated, lawmakers shouting at each other. Democrats are accusing Republicans of asking questions in an effort to determine the whistleblower's identity. But Vindman, a decorated war veteran, says he reported his concerns out of a sense of duty and insists he is not the whistleblower and does not know who that person is. Now, Vindman's account also seems to contradict the testimony of Gordon Sondland. He's the U.S. ambassador to the EU, and he testified that no one ever raised concerns with him about his approach to Ukraine. But George Vindman says he did just that he told Sondland that his comments were inappropriate. So, George, lawmakers are likely to have some additional questions for the ambassador.
Yeah, we'll have to see if Sondland cleans that up. Meantime, Mary, the House is set for that floor vote on the impeachment process.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Today was the end of a packed week of testimony in the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump. It is also likely the final day of televised hearings in this round of the inquiry. Today, we heard from the 10th and 11th witnesses. One is a career diplomat, a guy named David Holmes, who's currently the counselor for political affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, and who, by his own reckoning, did not imagine he would be testifying here, except that he directly heard the president asking the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, about the hit job Trump wanted on his political rival. Remember, this is when Ambassador Sondland called Donald Trump from the middle of a restaurant in Kyiv.
What did Ambassador Sondland say to you?
He said he doesn't really care about Ukraine.
Did he use slightly more colorful language than that?
He did.
What did he say that he does care about?
He said he cares about big stuff.
Did he explain what he meant by big stuff?
Well, I asked him, well, what kind of big stuff? We have big stuff going on here, like a war with Russia. And he said, no, big stuff like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani is pushing.
Well, the Biden investigation, that's what he cares about. Surprising. The other witness was a renowned Russia expert named Fiona Hill. Now, she served as the senior director for European and Russian affairs on President Trump's National Security Council, working for the president. She's a Trump White House official until the middle of July. Her testimony was, as reporter Alex Thomas put it, quote, "At the risk of committing punditry, Fiona Hill is the most competent witness I've ever seen before this committee. She might be the most competent witness I've ever seen before Congress at any point. I've seen dozens of professors testify in areas where they are experts." My colleague Nicole Wallace wrote, quote, "I spent much of my career in politics. I've never seen anyone like Fiona Hill. She brought a poise, expertise, and command of the facts, and an absolute lack of tolerance for the, charitably put, childish behavior and ridiculous conspiracy theories that have been spewing from the Republican members on the dais."
Some of you on this committee appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country, and that perhaps, somehow, for some reason, Ukraine did. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. This is the public conclusion of our intelligence agencies, confirmed in bipartisan congressional reports. It is beyond dispute, even if some of the underlying details must remain classified. The impact of the successful 2016 Russian campaign remains evident today. Our nation is being torn apart. Truth is questioned. Our highly professional and expert career foreign service is being undermined. Right now, Russia's security services and their proxies have geared up to repeat their interference in the 2020 election. We are running out of time to stop them. In the course of this investigation, I would ask that you please not promote politically driven falsehoods that so clearly advance Russian interests.
Fiona Hill also delivered damning testimony about the reaction of former National Security Advisor John Bolton to demands for Ukraine to open those investigations.
What was that specific instruction?
The specific instruction was that I had to go to the lawyers, to John Eisenberg, our senior counsel for the National Security Council, to basically say, you tell Eisenberg, Ambassador Bolton told me, that I am not part of this whatever drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland are cooking up.
What did you understand him to mean by the drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland were cooking up?
I took it to mean investigations for a meeting.
Did you go speak to the lawyers?
I certainly did.
Republicans on the Intelligence Committee tried to tangle with Fiona Hill early on, but then at a certain point, they got tired of getting owned over and over and just flat out gave up asking her questions, trying unsuccessfully to just limit her chances to talk at all.
Thank you for your service. Thanks for being here, and I yield back.
Could I actually say something? Because we've had three.
Doctor, I was going to ask you if you'd like to respond. There have been a number. Gentleman suspended. Dr. Hill, you may respond.
No, I think that what Dr. Wenstrup said was very powerful about the importance of overcoming hatred and certainly partisan division. And it's unfortunate that Congressmen Turner and Ratcliffe have both left as well, because I think all of us who came here under a legal obligation also felt we had a moral obligation to do so.
Fiona Hill's ultimate moment of the day came when, while being questioned by the Republican counsel, she just succinctly boiled down the entire scandal to a very easy to understand phrase. She started by explaining why she got so upset with one of the people running point on the president's extortion scheme, Ambassador Gordon Sondland.
I was upset with him that he wasn't fully telling us about all of the meetings that he was having. And he said to me, but I'm briefing the president. I'm briefing Chief of Staff Mulvaney. I'm briefing Secretary Pompeo, and I've talked to Ambassador Bolton. Who else do I have to deal with? It struck me yesterday when you put up on the screen Ambassador Sondland's emails and who was on these emails, and he said, these are the people who need to know, that he was absolutely right, because he was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged.
A domestic political errand. It's absolutely right, though, of course, it cheekily undersells the gravity of that errand. What Gordon Sondland had been tasked to do by the president, Rudy Giuliani, was to pull off a political hit job. It did not have anything to do with the national security of the United States. It did have nothing to do with the foreign policy of the United States or the national interest or interest in corruption or any of that. We know that. Sondland was just a bagman for the Trump campaign, but using the official powers of the presidency to carry it off. Fiona Hill's explanation distills all the drama that we've seen, the regular channel and the irregular channel, the fact that all these experts who come to testify are working on Ukraine policy and they're all scratching their head thinking, what is going on? What is the roadblock? What's the holdup? Why is this happening? The mystery surrounding it all, the drug deal that is happening around the corner. Because national security...
Explosive testimony from Trump's top diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, behind closed doors for 10 hours. And if you read just his 15-page prepared opening statement, you know that Trump offered a quid pro quo. Period. Full stop. End of story, according to Taylor. This opening statement itself is thorough. It is detailed. In fact, for Taylor to read these 15 pages, it took over an hour. Taylor telling lawmakers that President Trump used the powers of his office to push Ukraine to investigate Biden and the 2016 election and a debunked conspiracy theory linked to that. One of the most alarming admissions refers to the text message sent by Taylor to the ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, back in September. Let me just remind you of that text message. It said, are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? Sondland responds, call me. Well, Taylor revealing exactly what was said on that phone call. And this comes from the opening statement. I want to read some of these lines. They're really important. He says, during that phone call, Ambassador Sondland told me that President Trump had told him that he wants President Zelensky to state publicly that Ukraine will investigate Burisma, that, of course, is the company Hunter Biden was on the board of, and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. election. Taylor then goes on to say that Ambassador Sondland said, quote, everything, which he put in quotes, was dependent on such an announcement, including security assistance. He said that President Trump wanted President Zelensky to put President Zelensky, quote, in a public box by making a public statement about ordering such investigations. 6 days later, Taylor writes, he's recounting a conversation he had with Trump's official in charge of Europe, Tim Morrison. And Taylor testifies again, writing here, quote, according to Mr. Morrison, President Trump told Ambassador Sondland that he was not asking for a quid pro quo,
But President Trump did insist that President Zelensky go to a microphone and say he is opening investigations of Biden and 2016 election interference, and that President Zelensky should want to do this himself. Okay, it does not matter what you call something. What matters is what it is. And what Bill Taylor lays out in excruciating detail is the definition of a quid pro quo, which is what this impeachment investigation is all about. Now, the White House and Republicans are on defense tonight. Congressman Mark Meadows telling reporters nothing new here, I think. And a new statement from the White House reads, quote, President Trump has done nothing wrong. This is a coordinated smear campaign from far-left lawmakers and radical, unelected bureaucrats waging war on the Constitution. There was no quid pro quo. I mean, first of all, the facts are in here and they're very clear. Okay, it's a quid pro quo. It's true. Trump kept saying it wasn't one, and then he laid out exactly that's what it was. And we should note when they take a slam at career bureaucrats. I mean, Taylor is a seasoned diplomat, an Army veteran, a West Point graduate, serving both Republican and Democratic presidents since 1985, appointed to an ambassadorship, his first one from President George W. Bush. And all of that adds up to what makes his testimony so damning tonight. Manu Raju is out front live on Capitol Hill. Manu, obviously it took him an hour to read these 15 pages, but then he submitted to 9 hours of questions. What more are you learning about what he said?
Well, Democrats and Republicans are asking him a lot about the essence of what he laid out in this 15-page testimony, more details about exactly what he said. What I'm told from various sources is that he had a lot of details. He had been able to corroborate some of his information by the notes that he took, and was able to provide some information that gave some members more confidence in what he was saying, reflected exactly the truth of what happened. Now, what I'm also hearing is some members on both sides of the aisle concerned that his testimony conflicts with Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the European Union, who testified last week that he did have a conversation with President Trump, a brief conversation with President Trump, and that there was no quid pro quo, and he was not certain why the military aid was held up. But what Bill Taylor is saying very clearly today in his testimony, that Gordon Sondland told him that the reason why this was held up was they were waiting for the public declaration by the Ukrainian government of investigations into essentially the Bidens, as well as to the origins of the 2016 campaign, investigations that, of course, could help the president. He said that Gordon Sondland made that clear, and that President Trump told Sondland that. Now, what I'm hearing from members, or Republicans and Democrats, are saying the Gordon Sondland should come back, clarify his testimony, and they expect probably more questions for him to be sent his way. But there are other things that are Democrats and particularly alarmed by what Taylor said today in his testimony. He said that he was referring to a conversation he had with Gordon Sondland when he said talking about President Trump, he says when a businessman is about to sign a check to someone who owes him something, he said the businessman asked that person to pay before signing the check. And what Sondland said is President Trump is a businessman. Aaron? All
right, Manu, thank you very much. And I want to go out front now to someone who was at the deposition of the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine today, the Bill Taylor deposition, Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass, who serves on both the House Foreign Affairs and Judiciary committees. Obviously, as I'll say it again, Congresswoman, an hour to read the opening statement, but then 9 hours to submit to questions from your team, from Republicans' teams, from the lawyers in the room. What else did you learn from Bill Taylor that is important today?
Well, I think that it is all in the statement, which I believe he's not confirmed. I thought it was just extremely troubling to hear him confirm essentially what he had said before, which is it is crazy, the idea that you would hold back foreign assistance for a political favor. I have to tell you, when this is all said and done, Ambassador Taylor is a patriot. He is courageous. He was told not to come and testify. He came anyway. I think it was just a very, very critical day in terms of our investigation.
Well, and as to point out, especially as the White House is slamming career bureaucrats, as they call them, he has, as he said, served under every administration, Republican and Democratic, since 1985, Reagan appointee at that time, or served under the Reagan administration, and obviously his first ambassadorship under George W. Bush. How important was Taylor's deposition to your impeachment case against the president, Congresswoman Bass?
Well, I think it was critically important. And you know what I believe is happening here is that for the last 2.5 years, People in the State Department have had to live with an administration that denigrated them, that disrespected them, that didn't take their advice. I'm on foreign affairs. I travel the world. I go to embassies around the world. And every time I go to an embassy, I have to sit there and essentially encourage them and tell them that, you know, we, the American people, really support them. We appreciate what they're doing. I think his testimony was critical. I think it just shows, once again, you can't just say there's no quid pro quo and do exactly that, and then it's okay. You can't just commit a crime and say that you didn't and then expect it to go away.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because one of the sentences said, according to Mr. Morrison, President Trump told Ambassador Sondland that he was not asking for a quid pro quo, period.
Right.
The next sentence reads, but President Trump insisted President Zelensky go to a microphone and say he's opening investigations of Biden and 2016 interference, and that President Zelensky should want to do this himself. That is the definition of a quid pro quo. And yet it appears Congressman Mark Meadows decided to see just the first sentence there. Here's what he just said. In the same room as you all day, Congresswoman Bass. Here's what he said.
I've been in there for 10 hours. I can assure you there was no quid pro quo.
I mean, at some point in time, you can't just say that something is not happening when all of the evidence is right there in front of you. Now, you know, I have a little bit of empathy for my colleague, because what could he say? The evidence was clear. The testimony was clear. And so for him to say there was nothing new, in a way, that's true. I mean, we did have the president's chief of staff have a press conference last week and give a perfect example of a quid pro quo. And he told all of us, we just have to get over it. You cannot normalize criminal behavior. No one is above the law.
So I want to ask you one other thing that's come out of all this today. And, you know, also as your capacity as the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Bass, President Trump today tweeted his anger at the whole impeachment process. And he wrote in part, quote, all Republicans must remember what they are witnessing here, a lynching. Some Republicans have defended the president. Lindsey Graham first said, quote, this is a lynching. In a sense, this is un-American. Later, he was asked if he understands why anyone would be offended by those comments, and I want to play for you what Senator Graham said.
Okay.
Lynching. But it was not only the local media that twisted the information released. Even while the open hearings took place, international media houses also presented the leftist views with their own anti-Trump analysts and reporters. Even the BBC presented their version of the impeachment hearings, and all these guests they had on are as biased towards the left that they make it seem that President Trump committed crimes worse than Hitler or Stalin.
This week, the impeachment inquiry was probably the most explosive yet.
Let's see if we can get in.
On Wednesday morning, the Republicans stormed the committee rooms where impeachment investigations were being conducted. They were angry that the testimonies were being held in private. The day before, investigators heard from this man, William Taylor, the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And his testimony was a bombshell.
This is my most disturbing day in Congress so far.
In his 10-hour private testimony, Taylor explicitly said that U.S. military aid to Ukraine was being withheld until they opened up an investigation that could be damaging to Democrats and the Bidens. Or, as they used to say in ancient Rome, a quid pro quo. Let's break it down. According to Taylor, Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the EU, put it bluntly. Donald Trump is a man with a checkbook, a businessman at heart. Sondland said, when a businessman is about to sign a check to someone who owes him something, the businessman asks that person to pay up before signing the check. Thank you. Taylor objected to this comparison, saying that Ukraine was a key regional ally fighting for their survival and they didn't owe the United States anything. Tangling them up in a political dispute was crazy. So what do we make of Bill Taylor? Is he credible? He will be for many. Bill Taylor went to Harvard and West Point. He fought in Vietnam and won a Bronze Star. He has 50 years of public service. He worked for a Democratic senator and served as an ambassador in both the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations. He was personally asked by Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to fill in as ambassador to Ukraine earlier this year.
That is a very important statement from a very credible person.
Donald Trump had a different view, expressed as always in a tweet. He said he doesn't even know him. Another character emerged this week. A woman who said she was from the White House Budget Office appeared in a video conference with Taylor, but he couldn't tell.
Without any facts to present for a hearing in the Senate, the Democrats stand a chance to have their impeachment trial fizzle out into nothing. Any trial is based on facts and not assumptions of third parties. And only facts should be included as evidence, while all assumptions should be discarded. This will lead to the impeachment trial imploding to nothing. The hate for President Trump is so great that the Democrats are willing to destroy their own party in order to keep their own crimes under wraps, but unfortunately for them, this president is not scared to have the crimes of the past by Democrats investigated. But what it all comes down to is the military assistance towards the Ukraine. Here is what the Obama administration gave the Ukrainians in their military assistance program, but here is what the Trump administration gave as assistance to the Ukrainian government.
Here we have the FGM-148 Javelin missile. This is one of the best anti-tank missiles in the world, if not the best. There is no known armor in the world that can withstand a hit from this missile. It's a thinking missile. Line it up on your target, fire, forget it, and it will guide itself to its target.
Now that you have seen what the Javelin missiles are capable of, would you, if you were in charge, not take a closer look at the new president of a country that you have been assisting to ensure that he will not use these weapons against his own people like we have seen in other countries in the Middle East? Would you not make sure the new president can be trusted before releasing very deadly weapons to their military for use? I know that I would have delayed the release of this type of military assistance to a newly elected government. But it is not for me to speculate as to the reasons for the delay, but you can make up your own mind. Remember to like and subscribe to my channel.